Hello everybody. So in recent years, digital social networks have seen a rise in fictional stories that aim to revive memories of historical periods through the creation of fictional profiles. So what do we mean by that? A digital profile refers to the information collected on a platform that describes and characterizes a user, such as name, username, place of birth and residence, interests and habits. This information can be provided by the user or automatically generated by the platform based on factors like geolocation. According to Louise Merzeau, who is a researcher in information and communication science, a profile serves as a connection point between collections of resources like text, photos, videos, and sounds, and interpersonal dynamics such as actions, relationships, and evaluations. One of their specificities is that they not only appear on the newsfeed, but are also shaped by it, written by the platform and its design. They come to life through their affiliations, such as the suggestions they receive and the conversations they have with other profiles. It's no coincidence that fictional profiles are increasingly used for commemorative or cultural purposes. On social networks, these archival fictions create a space where authors and readers interact, thus reactivating the past in the social present. These works try to tell a larger story through embodiment. Therefore, they possess the features of novel characters while maintaining their uniqueness. As Raphael Baroni points out, when we immerse ourselves in a fictional story on paper, we are simultaneously involved in and excluded from the world being portrayed. However, on a social network, we are not only involved in the same world, we can communicate with the fictional character. Fictional profiles blurs the boundaries of literary works and the traditional roles of writers and readers.
Yes, indeed. So we will present some methodological issues for discussing these profile-based works. So first of all, we would say that profile-based works destabilize the category of the writer, as the creator of a profile is never just one individual. All writing on social networks are created and published inside a techno-structure made of algorithms, but also from prefabricated short-form editorials that reflect the owner's point of view on writing, editing, and sharing. So we will lean on the theory of the architext by Yves Jeanneret and Emmanuel Souchier in order to show how these short-form editorials contribute to the writing of profile-based works. More precisely, we propose to analyze the social network as a canvas intended for the collection and narrativization of archival and memorial traces. In order to analyze the mediating action of this canvas, we will rely on Paul Ricoeur's concepts of sameness and dipseity. We will show how social networks succeeded in constituting themselves as operators of contemporary selfhood, by deeply connecting identity markers, affiliations, and narrative programs. The symbiotic techno-skin of the profile-based work can certainly be said to be corrupted and infected by capitalism. But it is also moving, touching, reactive to the upheavals of real life. The author of a profile-based work animates their character life on the social network, making him reachable and permeable to otherness. The profile-based work also destabilizes the category of reader. Firstly, as the reader can get involved in co-writing the profile-based work by conversing with it, and secondly, because the reader, in order to inquire about a profile, must necessarily consider the specifics of their own profile on the platform. The creation of a profile always leads to a filtering process that will determine the place given to the characters' posts on the newsfeed, and as such, their visibility and the way we will interpret them as readers. So obviously, the idea that a text is never accessible in and of itself is a founding idea of pragmatic semiotics. But on a social network, this idea is concretely materialized, as the reader can only access the profile-based work through the prism of their own profile. Consequently, beyond a hermeneutic approach of the interface, we propose to rely on social semiotics in order to works. This approach takes a lead from perspectivism and postulates that the visible and the invisible are relative to the capacities of the person who perceives them. So for four of the profile-based works we will analyze today, we will adopt a reader's perspective. And a third work will be informed by the author's perspective. So we come to our first example.
What if social media had existed during the First World War, allowing us to follow the day-to-day accounts of soldiers from 1940 onwards? This idea served as the basis for the fictional profile of Léon Vivien, a soldier sent to the battlefront between 1914 and 1915. The Great War Museum in Meaux, France, opened in 2011. This museum aimed to make the history, heritage, and archives of the First World War accessible, utilizing digital cultural mediation. The museum emphasized the use of multimedia, immersive devices, and innovative scenography on its website. In 2012, the museum collaborated with the DDB Paris agency on an advertising campaign that juxtaposed archive photos with fictional caption to attract attention. The campaign aimed to humanize and contemporize the conflict through advertising language. The basis of this collaboration for this project, as for Léon Vivien fictional profile, was established in the form of a skills-based sponsorship. So, in 2013, this agency, DDB, and the museum collaborated on the fictional profile of Léon Vivien. The question is, why did they choose to create Léon Vivien? Firstly, for ethical reasons. The choice of the soldier who really existed was discarded. Instead of choosing an actual soldier, they drew inspiration from objects in the museum collections, such as soldier correspondence books, photographs, and everyday items from the trenches. The abundance of written and audiovisual traces from the Great War allowed for the creation of a rich memorial fund. Secondly, the fictional profile was chosen because of its archetypal dimension. Léon Vivien was conceived by its creators as an, and I quote, universal soldier, making it easier for Facebook users to relate to him. Thirdly, the fictional profile was also seen by its creators, and I also quote, as an innovative approach to attract younger audiences and those less connected to heritage, leveraging the reach of digital social networks. In doing so, Léon Vivien benefited from significant media coverage, certainly because of the theme chosen, but overall because of the implication of how a profile works on Facebook. Léon Vivien's Facebook profile allowed users to comment on his war diary and experience his daily adventures on the front until his supposed death on May 22, 1915. I think it is important to point out, sorry, this is the right slide, to point out that the Facebook architect on 2013 lends itself particularly well to a chronological enunciation. So, as this screenshot attests, the Facebook page almost 10 years ago, was built around a chronological thread that allowed the profiles post to be placed around a structuring and temporal axis in a space called Diary by the platform. This project attracted significant attention, with 60,000 users subscribing to this page and 9,000 comments posted from June 10, 1914 to May 22, 1915. These comments reflected strong emotions, attachment to the fictional profile, and anecdotes that provided glimpses into family memories of the Great War. I also interpret this profile as the desire of the museum teams and the DDB agency to use this profile to embody an experiment in symbiotic cultural mediation. By this term, I mean that Léon Vivien is a syncretic hybrid between the museum's collections, its teams, and the character whose aim is to be a third-party mediator between these different elements. Through the profile, Facebook users became emotionally attached to a fictional persona while simultaneously gaining knowledge about the Great War. To reach this conclusion, my interpretative process of the profile mobilized two levels of cultural knowledge. Firstly, it aimed to provide an history from the perspective of ordinary individuals, aligning with the so-called micro-history approach, or in Italian, microstoria. Because of my academic background in history, I linked Léon Vivien to this historian work, Louis-François Pinagot. This unknown, I'm sure you don't know him, unknown Norman clockmaker from the first half of the 19th century, had his biography reconstructed from archives by the French historian Alain Corbin. I consider that the vision given of Louis-François Pinagot, like that of Léon Vivien on Facebook, contributes to the construction of a fictional profile. This profile is the fruit of the vision of an author seeking to resurrect an individual through an approach that borrows from the skills of the historian, but also of the novelist. Therefore, Léon Vivien can be seen as such as an archival and archetypal persona, influencing the relationship with memory, documents, and transmission rather than being reflexive to the platform hosting it. Secondly, it evoked for me echoes with current events and family memories, fostering emotional connection to the archival material. The sign mobilized to give life to the fictional profiles, such as letters, photographs of people or objects, or daily posts on social media, created in me a feeling of intense circulation. Léon Vivien made me think both of what an Ukrainian soldier mobilized in Bakhmut or a Russian soldier in the trenches of Donbass might post on Facebook, but also of my personal history and family memory. If my grandfather, born in Oran, Algeria, had Facebook in the 60s, what would it have posted about the war and his departure for France in 1962? The echoes created by Léon Vivien are intentional, aiming to generate a strong emotional attachment to the archive through personal embodiment. This approach aligns with the third phase of the Great War imaginary, which emerged about 20 years ago, using fictional and memorial elements to create a retrofuturistic artwork. So our next study case is Ich bin so fischl.
So, in some cases, fictional profiles are based on deceased individuals incorporating archival materials and biographical details to reconstruct certain aspects of their personalities. For instance, Ich bin Sophie Scholl and Eva's stories, here on the screen, can be qualified as historical figures that are presented from a contemporary and subjective perspective. They take on a personified and performed approach, featuring professional actors who take selfies, portraying the illusion that Instagram existed during World War II. The motivation behind the creation of such profiles is the concern of losing the collective memory of World War II, as the surviving witnesses pass away. Cultural institutions are exploring innovative approaches to engage younger generations and create awareness about these sensitive and traumatic historical events. This shift is seen as a transition from the era of the witness to the era of the user, where the audience is encouraged to actively participate in the co-creation of a mediated memory. A new paradigm that emphasizes the role of users in shaping and preserving historical narratives, according to Van Dijk. An example of this is the Instagram account Ich bin Sophie Scholl, I am Sophie Scholl, which was created and launched in 2021 by 2 German public radio channels. So I precise that I will, as my previous colleague, take here a reader perspective to describe this work. The account presents the final 10 months of the life of German resistance member Sophie Scholl, who was part of the rightward movement fighting against National Socialism. It adopts a diary-like format, chronicling her life like a real-time fiction until the day she was arrested and executed by the Nazis. The aim was not to create a documentary archive or biographical account, but to offer a fictional interpretation of a historical figure who is not widely known. It combines fictional content using Instagram tools with authentic vintage documents related to Nazi propaganda. This blurs the boundaries between fiction and historical reality, creating an intriguing experience for the audience. One of the producers, Südwestrundfunk Radio, I speak better German than English, I think, stated that the goal was to engage audiences from a current, emotional, and radically subjective perspective, rather than providing an accurate portrayal. The account reached its peak in June 2021 with almost 1 million followers. While Sophie Scholl is interpreted on screen by a single professional actress who always talks from her perspective, her authorship is embodied by a team of community managers with different teams of expertise and interpretative perspectives: historical, journalistic, artistic, or even psychological. They take turns playing Sophie Scholl and stimulate or engage attention by asking questions to users. Some questions tap into everyday experiences that everyone can easily identify with. Others elicit historical knowledge and encourage citizen engagement. What do you think will happen when the leaflet spreads to the University of Munich and then to the whole country? What other slogans could we paint on the walls? Some users play along, sharing their thoughts, feelings, and chat with the profile as if it were a real person, creating a sense of closeness. Besides, a lot of comments juxtapose the reception context of the work on Instagram with the Nazi era. They compare, for example, the freedom of expression during the period of containment with Nazi censorship. Some users take on an intimist tone. Does Sophie Scholl also suffer from loneliness or engage in a reflexivity process? Would have Sophie published her thoughts on a social media like Instagram in 1942? But some are more controversial. For instance, when they equate Nazi dictatorship with restrictions on freedom during COVID. Followers of the EFD, Alternative für Deutschland, which is a far-right political party, and the Querdenker movement of COVID-19 deniers are especially likely to refer to themselves as resistance fighters and as being persecuted. The appearance by Jana from Kassel at a Kerdenker demonstration in Kassel, in which he claimed to feel like Sophie Scholl, attracted a great deal of public attention and triggered a lot of comments on this Instagram profile. So, on the one hand, this digital representation of a historic heroine disrupts the accelerated usual flow of social networks, but on the other hand, the appropriation of a deceased individual raises ethical concerns. Many users express worries about the lack of historical context, which can blur again the boundaries between fiction and historical truth, and potentially even contribute to misinformation on a social network. A study revealed that many German high school students who saw this account believed Sophie Scholl was still alive and perceived her as an influencer. According to journalist Nora Hespers, the designers of the profile choose to rely on playful engagement, but by doing this, they left the task of giving historical context to young historians, to educators who actively use the platforms. So they filled in the gaps by reframing what was said and potentially misinterpreted. So one significant challenge of this profile lies in its numerous perspectives, from the actress, interpreter, from the various community managers who adopt the identity of a deceased person, but can also give explanation about the backstage work, and from the users themselves, who may range from amateurs to experts on the period. For some historians, the community management's response to critical comments is evasive, too late, or even non-existent. It fails to provide a scientific framework for debates. Thus, some controversies run the risk of glorifying a victimized past and perpetuating romanticized ideas about the choices made by Germans during the war. It can foster a distorted view of history and even a revisionist perspective when it leads users to believe that the vast majority of Germans were resistance, whereas they were part of the system. For instance, the exhibition of archival images from the Eastern Front by Sophie Scholl brought on a lot of shared families' memories describing how grandfathers were enrolled or captured as prisoners of war, creating the perception that most Germans were victims rather than accomplices of the Nazi regime. To sum up, this study demonstrates how the creation of a historical fiction profile on a social network involves collective participation and an ongoing reinterpretation of history. The collective enunciation leaves trace in the discussion, thus contributes to the formation of a collective memory. The profile not only comes to life through the content it shares, but also through the responses it generates. Despite some weaknesses that I try to highlight, this project demonstrates also how digital memory practices create a space where researchers and writers become producers of digital memory and educational initiatives. It highlights the increasing intertwining of the research community and the general public in debating painful and sensitive memories.
So we will come to our last example, which will be a research and creation example called Profil Sudette. As you saw, a recurrent trait of memorial profiles is the personification of great history based on biographical reconstruction of small lives, embarked in the whirlwind of historical events that exceed them. Since September 2022, I engaged my civilian profile, Alexandra Saemmer, in reconstructing the story of such people of little importance, my grandparents during World War II. The family I come from is Sudeten German, a minority that has been settled in areas of Poland and Czechoslovakia since the Middle Ages, and whose status, depending on the political situation, has fluctuated from oppression to domination. In 1938, with the approval of the majority of the Sudeten Germans, these territories were annexed by the German Reich. In 1945, after the defeat of Hitler's army, the Czechoslovak government ordered the expropriation and expulsion of the Sudeten Germans, accusing them of complicity with the Nazi regime. Piled into cattle cars and on foot, they had to leave the country. Many died during these death marches. Until today, many associations cultivate the Sudeten German memory. On Facebook, in particular, their pages regroup thousands of members who share archival materials, family trees, traditions, but also discuss their painful past, marked by the shame of collaboration with the Nazi regime, but also by a deep feeling of injustice. I entitled my work Profile Sudeten German because it aims, on the one hand, to reconstruct the expulsion and expropriation of my Sudeten German ancestors, but also to experience what being Sudeten German means today on social networks. I propose to start the analysis of this work from the following hypothesis. Profile-based historical narratives have many traits in common with biofiction. Some biofictions seek to reconstruct a coherent image of the past, but most of them rather attempt to give form to a new way of seeing or situating oneself in the present. Drawing, as Colin Teubing puts it, on a rooted imagination, these narratives assume themselves as partly fictional. The use of archives helps the author to fill in their blanks of memory. Facebook, in particular, provides the author with a canvas, helping them to collect and to narrativize archival materials. In order to analyze the mediating action of this canvas, Paul Ricoeur's categories of sameness and ipseity seemed enlightening to me. Indeed, Paul Ricoeur distinguishes between two components of identity. The sameness designates the invariant substratum of the subject, which guarantees a form of permanence in time. On Facebook, the editorial form of the bio suggests this form of permanence. The dynamic manifestations of the profile are spread over two news feeds. The first one hosts the profile's personal posts. As it organizes the episodic dispersion of life around a stable temporal axis, I propose to call it the diary. The second newsfeed mixes the profile's posts with those of friends, subscribed pages, as well as commercial ads. As it reflects the profile's tastes and affiliations through the publications of others, I propose to call it the kaleidoscope. Its precise configuration is only accessible to the author's perspective. No reader will be able to view the kaleidoscope of my personal profile, for example, or of your profiles. So the kaleidoscope is permeable to otherness within the limits of the filter bubble. This ambiguous status, made of sameness and otherness, can be apprehended thanks to the concept of ipseity, a second component of identity that designates, according to Paul Ricoeur, the set of identifications by which the otherness intrudes in the composition of the same. So ipseity is based on values, norms, and models adopted by the subject, on the condition of being in touch with possible communities of affiliation. And this is precisely what Facebook takes care of when it connects us to our communities and affiliations. The mediation between sameness and ipseity is ensured by narrative identity. However, narrative identity requires a configuring act, a poiesis. So social networks reconnect the fluid postmodern subject to their possible affiliations. This is how they succeeded in constituting themselves as fundamental operators of identity. The life story told in the diary may then remind one of modernist literature, reflecting the interiority of the author. The kaleidoscope is the cyborg dimension of a profile-based work, as its composition is partly controlled by the author and partly calculated by the machine. So since September 2022, my diary has been dedicated exclusively to the reconstruction of family memory. But I, as a profile, have also subscribed to a large number of pages run by Sudeten-German associations. The posts of these pages now almost exclusively fill my kaleidoscope. They are a precious source of information which allows me to feed my biofiction from day to day. The precise circulation of contents between the kaleidoscope and the diary is, however, only accessible to me. For example, a post recently appeared on my kaleidoscope announcing that the emperor has arrived. Der Kaiser war hier. I couldn't help but comment on this message, having no idea who that emperor was. A member of the page told me that the picture shows a descendant of the Habsburg family visiting the former Sudetenland. These territories, before being annexed by the Nazi regime, indeed belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The post, in fact, echoes my family history, as my Sudeten great-grandfather was a member of the Austrian Imperial Guard. But the discovery driven by the kaleidoscope also led me to a delicate question. Was my Sudeten-German family Nazi during the Second World War, or rather royalist? In fact, both commitments coexisted in many Sudeten-German families. The community to which I affiliate myself on Facebook helped me to grasp this historical complexity and to narrativize it in the diary. But since I don't have any photos of my great-grandfather, neither of my grandparents participating to Nazi rallies, I relied on archival materials to illustrate some of these posts. It also happens that other profiles comment on my posts. The coloring, done graciously by a reader thanks to a tool of my heritage platform, allowed me to date a family photo that represents my grandparents a few weeks before the expulsion, and to confirm that my mother was conceived during my grandfather's last frontline vacation in the spring of 1944, and not during a rape perpetrated by a Russian soldier some weeks later, as a persistent family rumor suggests. The dialogue with the author of the coloring, a member of a Sudeten-German association that I met on the kaleidoscope, allowed me to understand that these rumors about rapes were often founded, but also used in families to discredit the raped and expelled women. By reflecting together on my family photo, the profile named GR in the Sudeten-German Association and myself participated on the continuous reinterpretation of history on social networks. Unlike a paper narrative, which, as Paul Ricoeur wrote, unfolds a world of its own, the episodes of Profile Sudeten-German are definitely interwoven with other slices of life. This complex relationship to real life, reflected on social networks, makes the flavor of memorial profiles, but also constitutes their ambiguous, risky nature, which raises ethical questions, as Nolwenn said before. For example, a distant cousin, regular reader of my profile, has left comments under my posts, some of which reflect his discomfort at seeing our common family history displayed on a social network. He also questioned me about the boundaries between fact and fiction, as I have repeatedly led to fill in blanks of memory with archival material documenting other lives. So we'll come to the conclusion now.
As demonstrated by these 3 case studies, the memorial practices associated with fictional profiles, whether examined from the readers of the author's perspective, are deeply rooted in the participatory culture of social media. Profile authors and users collaborate to create a space for exchange and debate where each individual becomes a memory producer and contributes to the construction of a collective culture of remembrance. From our analysis, 5 cross-cutting themes have emerged. The first one relates to the symposium's focus. The enunciator of fictional profiles often embodies a symbiotic role, representing an hybrid between multiple interpretive prisms, professional cultures, and organizational types, such as museums, heritage institutions, advertising agencies, radio station, or collective of descendants of Sudeten Germans. The second theme is the frequent use of microhistory and biofiction to shed light on the great history, challenging the prevailing narrative that revolves around elites and famous figures. This paradigm shift allows for more comprehensive understanding of history and memory. The third theme is the incorporation of history and memory into the present, achieved through the use of subjective viewpoints, even to the extent of allowing anachronism in French on social media. The fourth theme is the increasing blurring of boundaries between historical reality and fiction in cultural and memorial mediation practices. Finally, the fifth theme addresses ethical consideration. As Nolwenn said, it raises questions about the professional ethics that should guide the conception, the enunciation, and the interactions with the memorial profile. It also explores the stance one should adopt concerning the use of mainstream platforms such as Facebook for public memory mediation and the handling of sensitive materials related to wars, genocides, or deportations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presence here. If you have any questions, we are here to answer them just before lunch. So Scott and Geneviève, I don't know who was first. Yes, you can use our microphone. Okay.
I just had one question. Yes? Okay. So I had one question that's sort of outside of the diegetic space of what you were talking about, which is that when you were producing this, I believe it was kind of during the pandemic, yeah? Mostly, or?
Oh, it was the former project. Indeed, we had we also made a project before, which is called Nouvelles de la Colonie, and we co-wrote a project on Facebook together, and this was partly about the isolation and the confinement in pandemic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe. Also, maybe you could just say a little bit more about, I'm wondering whether the narrative turns were influenced by that interaction with the users. I mean, I know that you had things like the Kaiser come in, but did you sort of have the plot more or less worked out? Or was it really bent in different ways by those interactions with the users?
The 3 cases are very different because and also our insight in these 3 cases are very different because 2 of them are read in a reader's perspective and the third one is read from the author's perspective. So what I can say that the interactions I have with my readers about the work on Sudeten Germans are profoundly influencing the storyline. Because in some way they inspire me, they give me ideas. It's the same with all the Sudeten-German pages I affiliate myself on. You see, so all the stuff which is constantly coming, raising up on Facebook, influences the storyline of the ongoing work. Yeah, profoundly. Even if I have a main storyline that I created, a kind of synopsis, but I really let myself being influenced by these interactions.
And just in the case of Sofischol, for example, it was displayed during the containment period, but as it is a big production, I think everything is written in advance, and so what changes, I think the interpretation of the user changed because it is the containment period. So that I try to highlight this, like they make comparison for the freedom of expression. So I think the context in which the work is received change a lot about the interpretation. But the work in itself and its narrative, and that's maybe the problem, maybe, I don't know, but they do it in advance, so they cannot change it. What they could change is the response, the answers given, but sometimes it's evasive, or they don't want to take any risk, so it's difficult. And also in Sofischol, one of the things is that she only speaks about what she knows at this period. So because it's in 1943, so a lot of history works, and so she doesn't speak at all about this. It's like she doesn't know, for example, about concentration camps. So that raises ethical questions about.
Fascinating. Thank you.
But in some way, we could perhaps say that all these interactions and the traces of these interactions are also a great observatory of a kind of materialized reader response theory, you see, yeah, and of perspectivism. And the example Nolwenn gave us is very, very significant of that. Mm. Geneviève had also a question, so she's here.
Yes, wonderful. I'm going to ask you in French, and you can answer, of course, in English. No problem. Oui.
Okay, so this intersects with what just was said epistemologically, and you did mention the interactions with the theoretical side and research. Is this a type of research and creation? Because your personal engagement into this type of research, does that constitute research and creation? With the answers, it seems that way, but I do not get a firm impression. So that's my first question: is this research and creation? The second question is, as you said in your conclusion and throughout your presentation as well, the issue of ethics, the ethical question. We are on digital GAFA social media with feeds. My question is emotions. How did you work on the emotions? Because in your theoretical framework, you've shown it, the narrative theory, but what of the emotions? What can you tell us?
was about: is there a relation to research creation aspect in these works for us and for our personal implication? Well, for the third project we presented, so my project is it's an evidence. It's definitely a research creation project. The project on Sudeten Germans, yeah, definitely. The other two projects are apprehended by us. I don't know if we adopt a research creation perspective, but I think that, yeah, definitely it's certainly research creation, not only because of the interactions, the interactive dimension of these works, but also because science, so for example historical science, and while storytelling aspects are deeply interwoven. Yeah.
And maybe also when I worked on Soficial, it was over. It was, and you are working on something which is evoluting, and so it was too late in a certain way to invent maybe new way of exploring the profile. And one idea we have for the project, because this is part of a project we are just launching, is to maybe to create profile, to investigate on profiles, to create fictional profiles, to investigate on fictional profiles. So, and to exchange with them, with different personalities. But this, I was not able to do it because it was already over. But if we can do it for another example, it would be very interesting. This would be research creation, I think.
And maybe I can answer for your second question about ethical question, ethical concern about an educational project on these sensitive materials on social media such as Facebook. So first, for Léon Vivien, it's important to specify it's an old project, almost 10 years ago. So it's a project described by its creators, the ad agency or the museum's director, for instance, as very innovative. They use also a lot of metrics to prove that it's a popular project, and they use the interaction, to prove they can reach younger audiences and so on. So for Léon Vivien specifically, in interviews that I found, there is no ethical concern about the platform, but maybe because it's linked to the context. The Cambridge papers arrived later, all the scandals about Facebook arrived later, and in 2013 for cultural and heritage institution, it was perceived in a more utopic point of view. It was a new field to explore. And I think the ethical concerns arrived later, maybe for your project, for the project you studied, Nolwenn, about Soficial.
Thank you for really interesting presentations. I noticed many of the ethical issues you raised, or the concerns that people had, were like, is this real, is this not real? And it made me think about the European Union's AI Act, which is probably going to be voted through in January 24, I think. And one of the things they want to regulate is they want to say that anything generated by AI has to be marked as AI generated. And what you're doing, I mean, obviously you're not AI, but I feel like it speaks to something similar, and the fact that the stories are being spread on AI well, recommendation systems, right? There's something interesting happening there, and it just made me think whether, I mean, should you have marked it? Art isn't usually marked. What happens to art if we have to mark it as, oh, this is art, it's not real? These are questions we might have to consider if the AI Act actually covers art in future. I don't know if it will.
It's a fascinating question. Huh? For the more I work on profile writing, the more I'm convinced that it is very, very close to the cyborg writing you described in your panel, and you discussed in your panel. It may seem distant, but it's not, because all depends on how you consider the work and the frontiers of a profile-based work. In my opinion, the profile-based work is not only the text and the images that are put on Facebook, for example, or Instagram by the author, but it's the structure itself, which is, and that's also why the ethical question, why doing it on a commercial platform, is so important, because it's the structure, the architecture of the work, indeed. So, and of course, in all these networks, and especially on Facebook, we know that there are IA technologies embedded in, and we are writing with that. And I, as an author of profile-based works, I'm really convinced that I use these platforms in rather the same way I would use ChatGPT, for example, as a writing tool, as a canvas, but also a very proactive writing tool, and not only a passive support.
Sometimes it's written that it's a fictional work, like for official, but students, they don't see it. So.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.